Okay, folks, let's get started. Everybody, please take a seat. Notice the sound is quite a bit different than before. Welcome everybody to the October 13th regular meeting of the Kensington Police Protection and Community Services District Board of Directors. My name is Len Welsh, Board President. And I'll take roll call at this time. Director Gillette?
Here.
Director Sharis-Watt?
Here.
Director Toombs?
Here.
Director Cordova is not going to be present tonight, and she will not be participating as we originally thought would be the case. So reporting out on closed session, nothing to report, no action taken on any of the three items.
Were you going to read something for him?
Shall I do it now, or?
Any,
All right, I'll,
Hold on one second.
Okay.
Did you want to say something about the sound system?
I did. Do you mind?
Yeah, just so everybody understands what's going on with that.
Let me just give a quick orientation with the sound system. It's a 15-inch neck. You don't need to be that close like we were before. You probably never have to kiss the mics anymore. I know that everyone's probably pleased about that. It has a red and a green light down here at the base of it. It has a red and a green light on the microphone itself. So if it's a green light, the microphone is on. Green light here, you have the option of turning the mic off just by pushing the button. If it's red, all right, it'll be off, okay, at this point in time. So I'd be very careful, if you're saying something you don't want to necessarily go out publicly, be careful, because you can hear everything.
Yeah, I would also recommend, I'm already hearing it, I see that mics are on, and I would recommend to the board members that they turn them off, because just doing something like this.
We can program it if you'd like for them to be what they call a hot mic, which means that they're always on. That's certainly up to the board. We can program in that. Just real quickly, I'd like to talk about the assisted listening devices. We do have two different kinds, although they work the same way. We have ones if you are just need some assistance in the hearing aspect. You can just get this. It goes right around the ear, all right, and it'll magnify the sound. What we've learned through Dr. Delk tonight already is our first candidate that when I picked up the box, the battery box, they didn't plug in the battery box. So it reminded me of time when I was a young sergeant and all the lights went out at Santa Rita for the first time and no one put any gas into the generator. So this is an opportunity for a couple things on the checklist to get fixed. So this is just an easy plug-in, and we'll keep an eye on this. We have 4 right now. If there are more, we can certainly buy more at a fairly inexpensive cost. For those that have T-coil ear implants,
I'm sorry, so do we have one functional for tonight?
no,
We don't, okay.
we do not. After Dr. Delk, was tried it out, and it just did not work tonight because it wasn't charged for the last couple days. My apologies. If you have a T-coil hearing implant, so everyone, there's different styles, obviously, there are different kinds. This is just like a lanyard, so you would take this, all right, and you have to program your hearing implant to T, all right, and then what this does, this feeds right into, wirelessly, right into the hearing implant. It worked for probably a matter of a minute, and she said she could hear loud and clear with using the T-coil. So there's two different options, two different ways, all right? Hearing aid, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. So for the hearing implant, or hearing aid, this is for the T-coil aspect. Other than that, when you come up to the podium, it is sensitive. So you'll learn, I think, very quickly that you no longer have to kiss the mic, so.
Thank you, Chief Hart. Okay, Rochelle?
Director Cordova emailed us this statement, just to be read into the record. Lynn, you have a copy, don't you? Yes. Okay, great, okay. Earlier this week, she writes, earlier this week, I was hospitalized in Italy due to an autoimmune-induced cardiovascular event. I was discharged yesterday with good prognosis, but will continue immunosuppressive therapy until my status improves. While I am unable to travel by plane at this time, I will continue to conduct district business by phone and email. Despite the challenging language barrier, I am receiving excellent medical care and resting comfortably.
Thank you for that, Director Sheriff Swat. Okay, so at this time, let's see, we entertain comments from the public. Would somebody like to comment on matters not on the agenda? Come on up.
It's green, it means it's on. Okay, good evening. My name is Leslie Reckler, and I've lived in Kensington since the year 2000. I've served as an executive vice president at Korematsu Middle School and president for 2 years. I've held numerous positions in legislative and safety at Kensington Hilltop Elementary School PTAs. And now I spend a great deal of time working at the Bayside Council of PTAs, and that's the umbrella organization that supports the 26 schools in Contra Costa County and John Swett school districts. I thank you for your service. Tonight, I am in front of the community asking for your support and a yes vote on Measure T and a yes vote on Prop 55 in November's election. Measure T supports schools in West County, and it is not a new tax. It is the renewal of an already existing local funding measure that supports programs in our schools. Measure T does not pay for school buildings and should not be confused with bond funds whose sole purpose is to do that. Measure T raises about $9.8 million a year, and it pays for school programs. In our case, it's guidance counselors, school libraries, librarians, and sports. Although the funding for this measure does not expire until 2019, we've learned from the past that the best chance we have to renew it is to put it on a ballot during a presidential election. The spending of these funds is audited yearly by an independent accounting firm. An exemption is available to seniors, and in one of the more passive-aggressive editorials I've ever read, Measure T was indeed endorsed by the East Bay Times. Prop 55, which is a state ballot measure, is also not a new tax. It continues the work of Prop 30, which passed in 2012 and radically restructured the way California's public schools are funded. While far from perfect, the funds from Prop 30 have provided a more simplified and fair statewide school revenue stream, and gave birth to the local control funding formula and the locally controlled accountability plan. Scores of organizations, including our own school board and the California State PTA, have endorsed Prop 55. I'd like to remind you that California's public schools still remain woefully underfunded. According to the California Budget and Policy Center, California now ranks 42nd, up from 49th in state spending. A 2016 report, California's Challenge, Adequately Funding Education in the 21st Century, estimates the amount of additional funding that would be needed to move California to the average funding level of the top 10 states is $47 to $56 billion, roughly doubling the current state funding. Perhaps at another time I can come back for 20 minutes and give you a presentation on school funding. I've given it before. Much to my surprise, people actually stayed awake to the end. In spite of this, we've made amazing progress. This year, 13 schools in our school district, including Kensington Hilltop Elementary, and many Title I schools, those are those schools that serve large populations of economically underserved students, were awarded California Department of Education Gold Ribbon Awards for award-winning innovative practices. As always, we are grateful for your unwavering support of our schools, and we urge you to vote yes with us in November. Lawn signs are available through me if you so desire some yard decor, and you can visit the Measure T 2016 website to obtain one. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the information, and it would be great to have you back for a more formal presentation. Anybody? Come on up.
Yes. I tried it earlier. I can't see. Okay. Mabry Benson here. I asked the board at the September 20th closed meeting why there was no mention of the CalPERS audit at meetings or in general manager reports, and of course I received no answer. But later I heard that Chuck had told someone that I was talking about a confidential report. I would like him to clarify to the public that record is not confidential.
And just to be clear, I don't recall saying that to anybody. If it's a PERS audit, I can't imagine why it would be confidential.
Well,
I think the only thing I said to Celia was, I never got it.
okay.
But I never said it was
okay,
confidential.
okay.
So it's not.
Yeah, well, it
please.
was
I-
told to
this is
me.
probably
and
too close.
Of course, you
I
can.
have it now, Celia.
You can understand why I'm concerned about that. So, okay, thank you. I'm glad you didn't say that.
Just to
Because
be
it is on
clear-
the website.
Just to be clear, Celia actually handled me something that says Board of Directors were CC'd on it. I still didn't get it. It doesn't mean it came to me. It means it may have come to the district, but I never got it. So, I mean, I appreciate that, Celia. Thank you.
Or did
I'll hold
I?
this for you.
And I think, Rochelle, you said you don't think you got it either.
I don't remember getting it, maybe I did, but I don't. I remember hearing about it, and what I understood was it's pretty routine for agencies all over the state. So-
Well, okay, then my next statement, I find it inexcusable that the board should bury this document. I guess, I'm gonna alter that. I'm gonna say, I find it inexcusable that it was buried. So who knows why it happened. Okay, I've gone over that. Okay, because my comment is about Mr. Hart. Mr. Hart claimed in a letter to CalPERS saying that his time was all spent on public safety duties. But in the Brown-Taylor report, which Chuck has told me several times to please read, it only allocated 65% of the time to the chief of police. Although I note that many of the duties that Brown-Taylor lists under the chief of police duties are really general manager duties, such as preparing a budget. So that I think 65% is high. And I also note that Mr. Spath has said that the points covered were all done under Mr. Harmon's reign. Yes, I can believe it, but Mr. Hart said he was appealing some of those items, so it's still a current issue. And I also want to ask, how much did that legal opinion about cost the district, the legal opinion that you only needed a 3/5 vote to amend the policy and procedures? I think the public deserves to know that figure. Thank you.
Good evening, Jim Watt. I'm back from 6 weeks abroad, during which time I had limited internet access. So I just learned about the CalPERS January 2016 audit of our pension plan. This audit, which was posted on the CalPERS website as a public document, indicates that the GM COP and the directors were copied of these findings, and therefore I had assumed were informed of those findings. Apparently, someone seems to feel that this information was not important, thus the public was not informed, nor are we aware of any follow-up action that has been taken. Item number 5 in this audit indicates the GM COP's pension should be based solely on that portion of his time devoted to police duties, since pension contributions to CalPERS were for safety personnel that do police work and do not cover miscellaneous personnel, such as general managers. While I believe the Brown-Taylor report's estimate that 35% would be devoted to GM work is rather arbitrary, it is certainly reasonable when you consider the time a GM must spend at board and finance meetings, park and community center building issues, dealing with audits, community questions, legal issues, and the time that should be devoted to long-range planning and budget issues. For Hart to claim that the two roles are enmeshed, as was the case in that January letter, and cannot be separated, does not make sense. It therefore seems reasonable that the board should expect, at a minimum, a 1/3 GM and a 2/3 COP split. On this basis, Hart's pensionable benefit would drop from 3% to 2% annually. This means that for the approximately 18 months of service, that his total Kensington pension would drop from about $6,500 to $4,300 annually, or about $2,200. If Hart or his spouse live another 20 years, that's a savings to Kensington taxpayers of $44,000. That's the economic side of the issue, but there are other troubling issues, such as, why have the concerns of this 9-month audit not been brought to the public's attention? And why, when Mayberry Benson raised this issue in a letter contained in this month's agenda packet, was it not included in an agenda item for the board to discuss? Why have board members, especially those who have served on the board for a long time and our legal counsel, not been aware of this issue and not taken steps to bring us into conformity with CalPERS? Does this mean that the former GMP COP Harmon's pension was not appropriately adjusted? Do we have the ability to correct for this on a go-forward basis? Are we prepared to clarify this in any future contracts that we might enter into for Hart's replacement? And speaking of Hart's replacement, why are we not looking at a part-time GM, since the evidence suggests that this job can be done in a 20-hour work week? Finally, I think the board needs to take a hard look at what items should be given priority as worthy of being on the agenda. Tonight's agenda puts the focus on such procedural issues as limiting the public's comment from 5 to 3 minutes and allowing meetings to extend beyond 10 p.m. Why is there no mention of this pension issue or the choices that might be possible for Hart's replacement? I should also add, why are we not also talking about the recent release of the CalPERS evaluation study, which shows that in the last year, or a year ago, our unfunded reserves increased by $514,000. Of course, we can bring all these items up in public comment period, but because of the Brown Act, they will not be debated. So once again, the public is left in the dark about the issues that really matter.
Leonard Schwartzberg. All of what I'm going to say relates, among other things, to the coming election and the fitness of the controlling majority to continue governing this community. Regarding amending the P&Ps to 3/5 required to amend and to 3/5 to extend meetings beyond 10 p.m., you should clearly leave it to the new board because they may well vote to undo it if you try to change it. I'm talking.
That's actually on the agenda, though. Maybe you can wait until that comes up.
Yeah.
Well, that's fine. But I do have some other issues here concerning the P&P. Is the P&P governing or only advisory? Unless there's a dictatorship by a small clique, those who govern must be governed. We are all familiar with Chuck and Len's repeated claims that the P&P is only advisory or guidelines. Actually, though, the misguided attempt to amend makes it seem like the old guard that has so badly mismanaged Kensington is trying to maintain its grasp on power. For those who are motivated by power, losing is quite painful. That the old guard feels a need to do so makes it seem like the P&P has come to be regarded as governing, a threat to their power. Who was doing oversight on Kevin's submission for personnel retirement benefits, such as what I understand to have been his more than questionable claim that 100% of his job is devoted to COP? Though that's not what he was hired for, clearly he was not doing the job of a district manager and allowing himself as COP to make what appears to have been his specious claim. Has this board assured that we are not paying more in retirement benefits than he has a right to? And since COP was actually only 50% time, as I understood it when he was hired, and the district manager isn't covered, is he entitled to any retirement benefits? If it's a part-time job, I don't know. And since he claims he wasn't doing 50% of his job, are we entitled to recover 50% of what he's been paid? I don't think so. Some people are saying that they think that was a violation of law. Is this issue being dealt with by the board? And please don't make phony confidentiality claims given the very general nature of the question. We have a right to know whether this board, still dominated by the old guard, is finally protecting the taxpayers by exercising proper oversight.
And by old, I assume you mean not chronologically old.
Oh, it's the gentleman. I voted for both of those today. Thank you, Leslie. Hi, Linda Lipscomb, Highland Boulevard. Well, I'm going to change the tone a bit, and that is, I have come to praise you. Of 417 cities that have 5,000 people or more, in a recent study, Kensington was found to be the 5th safest community. And I would like to thank both the old and the new guard, and in particular, to thank Chief Hart. I'm terribly sorry that you will be leaving. I feel that you've been a calming and measured hand on the community, and that all of you have contributed immeasurably to the safety of the community. And I, for one, would like to see that continued. Of course, the greatest amount of credit, if you will, should be observed in respect of the police officers who are the boots on the ground that keep this community, as I said, fifth safest community in the state. I said that to someone the other day, a young mother, and I have a sign in my yard that says, "Thank you" about that. And she said, "No, it's not. I looked it up. They're the seventh." I said, "Oh, you're going on the years before data. Look at the new one." Anyway, thank you. I'm glad you're here. I'm glad the community is doing so well. And I, for one, will miss you and wish you well.
Now, how far do I have to be away from this thing? David Bergen. This is an extemporaneous remark. Regarding this statement that we're the fifth safest city in California. First of all, we're not a city. Secondly, I did a search on the net. I found one other site which gave us number 13, and I found no other site that even mentioned us. The site that mentioned us as fifth is a financial site that deals in rentals back east. So the thing with statistics is you can make statistics say anything you want depending on how you ask the questions. So we may be a very safe community, I'm sure we are, but to say that we're the fifth safest in the state, I don't think so really, because you have to compare us to other locations like ours, and there are very few others like ours. Anyway, that's my take on that particular point. Thank you very much.
Good evening. I'm Carl Kruger. I'm also sorry that you're leaving, and I thank you for what you have done, and I'm disappointed that you're leaving. That's not why I got up. I got up to talk about a letter that was in the October Outlook. And I am surprised how someone can inflate, how someone can make 3 points, and each one of them is wrong. The one point was that we spent $2.7 million to compensate 10 officers. Now, I'd like you to go and look at the June statement 2016. Take the numbers, add them up. And when you do this, you will come up with exactly $167,411. Now, I can tell you all the items that we have paid for, including the compensation for the chief. It includes everything from salary to compensated cash out, overtime, uniform allowances, medical insurance, disability insurance, life insurance, PERS, and workers' comp. Now, it's very convenient to inflate numbers just before the election. Now, I don't think there's anyone in this room who has not made up his or her mind how to vote. But I just find it incredible that Jim would do this. Now, he objected to the MOU for the officers when we had a 3% increase and they gave back 3%. So it was a revenue neutral thing. And then he objected to this 3 times on 3 different occasions at the Finance Committee. He objected to it here. And then last June, we are sitting at the Fire Board. And the Fire Board gives 3% increase to El Cerrito. We're already paying 2.7% on 2.7% as much as El Cerrito does. And they give them 3% increase, and the Fire Board took all of 2 minutes to discuss it. Of that 2 minutes, I objected to it for a minute and a half. Jim was sitting there, and he said nothing. He didn't see anything wrong with that increase. Okay, 2 more things. Jim is talking about our fire department being on the upper end of cost. look at the ad hoc committee, and it will tell you it is exactly in the middle. I think he mixed up the fire department because that's the highest one in there. There's another thing in there what Jim is talking about. Can't find it. Oh, he is talking about the chief makes all the decision on expenditures. Now, I've been sitting for 5 years at Finance Committee. The stuff comes to the Finance Committee, it goes to the board sends it back to Finance, goes to, the board okays the budget. The general manager is not the one who decides the budget. Jim, I'm very disappointed that you would use this time to make 3 incorrect statements in the Outlook. Thank you.
Okay. John Gaccioni. Okay. The question now is, where exactly do we stand? Our interim chief of police general manager has submitted his resignation. Mr. Hart will be gone by the end of the month. Will an exit interview be conducted? If so, will the results of the exit interview be made public? Or like other district employees who have left, will the reason they left remain undisclosed? Can the community put its trust in KPPCSD board majority to manage the transition to replace or restructure the vacant position? Because of some forethought by board members Cordova and Shuris Watts, we do have succession plan options. We also have some information from the ad hoc committee addressing the wisdom of separating the chief of police and the general manager positions. It may well be time to retire the "'twas ever thus" justification that states, why change since for over 60 years we have always had the positions combined? Well, the obvious answer is our world has changed in those 60 years, and the combined position arrangement has outlived its usefulness. Instead of saving us money, it most likely is costing us money. We have seen in the previous election years the KPPCSD board majority has been less than forthcoming with problematic district news. For example, some have stated that the board knew of the Reno scandal as it was occurring, but chose to withhold the information from the community. If you will recall, it was a local newspaper reporter who broke the story and made the information public. The KPPCSD board was not too interested in informing the community of the police moral and ethical backsliding in Reno before the election. By the way, has anyone seen the Reno internal investigation report yet? As a community, where do we go from here? How do we establish and maintain transparency and accountability in governance? How do we go about regaining trust in our police department? How do we ensure the financial viability of the district without resorting to what amounts to a hostile takeover of our Kensington Fire Department? While some local boosters are asking us to put Kensington first, I would hope to see our district get its house in order and put the community first. Thank you.
Good evening. My name is Ron Weiselman, and I have a short comment, and it has to do with the beginning speaker. I realize that we have a school district here and we need money, but I believe it was partisan. And I think it sets a very poor example for anyone to come up here and talk about issues that they think are important to them. This issue is important to the community in one way, but there are so many measures on the ballot that are reasonable to talk about. And if we spend all our time listening to people hustle their particular proposition, I don't think it's fair to the community. If they want to leave information, I think it's perfectly fine to leave a pamphlet and to say what they have to say. But otherwise, I don't think it's proper. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Sky Dent. I was going to say three things. I don't know if I should say the first one. I'm actually opposed to Proposition 55, and I wasn't going to say so until it was pointed out. I've seen these propositions come and go, and the money is never allocated equitably. If you look at Richard Kennedy High School and compare it to the prison and Prison Break, it's exactly the same, but you don't see that at De Anza or you don't see that at El Cerrito. I'd also like to thank the chief. I found the police department, very concerned, very objective, and I think they've responded to my concerns, and I like what they're doing a lot, and I find everybody else I know does also. And I'd like to say that the last time I said something good about the police department, someone stepped up from the audience and called it propaganda. And I'd like to point out, I've been a journalist for 20 years, and I've taught media law for 10 years. The next time that's done, that person will know the meaning of slander and libel.
Good evening. My name is Lori Trevino. I'm here to speak about the CalPERS audit, and I'm not going to cover things that others have already said, but wanted to just add a few things. So I understand from the previous comments that the board members did not receive a copy of the audit, despite the fact that it was copied to them. So I do want to, I think it's important for you to consider a few questions. First of all, I'd like to know if when you did know about it, and which board members knew about it and when. But more interesting to me is who authorized the appeal of the findings in that audit, because those are policy decisions that ought to be made by the board, not by the general manager or the chief of police. Has CalPERS made any final determinations on those appeals? Has the board been notified of those? What are the cost implications of the determinations that were made by CalPERS? These are important questions that you need to consider before you make any decisions about whether to go forward on hiring a general manager or a chief of police. Thank you.
My name is Gretchen Gilfillan. I've lived in Kensington 58 years. And I want to tell Chief Hart, I've already told him personally, how I will miss him. I found him to be fair, a good listener, and very thorough in his reports. The reason I came to this microphone is to say how pleased I was with the ad hoc committee report. So much time, and effort put into that for all of us. And if we had had to hire someone to do the investigating that the committee did, it would be not possible for us to afford that. So I'm very grateful that we had that fine report. Thank you. Thank you, David Spath, very much.
Okay, any board members like to say anything? I'll go first. I would like to give my heartfelt appreciation and thanks for your service, Chief Hart. I think you've done a wonderful job. I think there aren't a whole lot of folks who really understand how hard it is to run this little hamlet day in and day out, the different issues that cross your desk every single day. People seem to have the idea this community runs itself, and it doesn't. There are all kinds of problems that occur that have to be resolved. I know you take a huge volume of phone calls. You engage in a lot of visits with citizens who felt free to come in and talk to you in the office, and welcome to do so. I've heard that feedback just about constantly ever since you've been here, and I've seen it in action. So I want to thank you for your professionalism. You've done a lot to, which again, I'm not sure is really understood by most folks. You've done a lot to professionalize our force, the way the office is run. I know you just made a move to hire a consultant to help us get our property room and related matters in order, bring us up to state of the art. We've made huge progress on the way we manage firearms. So you've done a lot of things. Some people might consider them mundane. I don't, because making any change is enormously difficult, especially when working with a police force. It's a tough group of folks to manage. They, by nature, have to be tough to do the job. And so I just want to say thank you for your service. I think we had a fantastic deal in you coming here and putting your heart and soul into this work, and I just can't thank you enough.
I'd like to echo those remarks, and I would start my remarks off by saying it was the best of times and it was the worst of times when you arrived. It was the worst of times because you came in when the community was in total disarray, with a lot of accusations being made, with a lot of difficult situations to deal with, and with a lot of mistrust and misunderstanding about what had occurred in the early part of this year with the Reno matter. There was not only misunderstanding of the facts, but misunderstanding of the law, misunderstanding of the role of the board, just a lot of things, and some mistakes that obviously had been made by the members of this board. So you came in at a very difficult time. And it was the best of times because it was an opportunity for someone to try to change that and change that dynamic. And what struck me about you, Kevin, and what I'm grateful for, is that you came in with a can-do attitude and with a willingness to really reach out to all parts of the community and try to bring them together. I remember your Thanksgiving meeting that you had where you and your wife provided a Thanksgiving dinner for the members of the community. I remember the barbecue that you sponsored when you first came here as real efforts to reach out to the community and bring us together. And so in that sense, I feel like you did as much as any human being could try to do to try and mend some of the deep fissures that had occurred here. I also think with respect to the police department, you brought a level of professionalism, as Lynn said, that we desperately needed. And I think for those of us who are not professional police people, I don't think we realized how deeply flawed the system was before you came here. And so I express my deepest gratitude for you in a short period of time, really marshaling the crew and getting consensus among the police officers that they too would want to increase the professionalism of the department. So it was the best of times for the community because of the things that you've done. And I greatly appreciate that as a member of this board. You leave work undone as you move on, and I think all of us are saddened by the fact that you are moving on. There was something mentioned on next door that you were fired, and I want to make it clear that you were absolutely not fired. This was your choice to resign at this time for your own reasons, and I respect that, and I think all the board members respect that. We owe a deep debt of gratitude to you, and I want you to know that I, for one, really appreciate everything that you've done for a community that I love. And I hope that the members of the community can take an example from this man who is now leaving us to say it is time to put the divisiveness behind us, to stop talking about the board majority versus the board minority, to stop telling stories that are not true, to stop making accusations that are just not based in fact. I'll have more to say at the next meeting about what it feels like to be a member of this board, the positives and the negatives. But we have an example here of someone who came into this community and tried to do good and was successful in doing a lot of good for us. And we ought to applaud that. and thank him from the bottom of our hearts for trying to bring Kensington back to the core values that make this a wonderful place to live. I hope that that's what we'll see going forward as I leave this board. And I thank you, Kevin, for giving us an example of how to do that.
I have to tell you, folks, I am red-green colorblind, so I don't know when this is on or off. Thank you. I don't know what to say, except you've done a terrific job. You came at the right time in our history. You brought a breath of fresh air, untainted by past behaviors. You were fair and judicious, and I think you ran the force objectively and with a solid hand on the tiller, which this community needed after prior mishaps. And we will all miss you and your service. And I do want to reiterate, you are walking out on your own. You told us you wanted to leave for your own reasons. No one pushed you at all. This is your personal decision. We abide by it. We're just going to miss you because it was a pleasure to work with you. Your open door policy for the community, and I think everybody here has been able to go in and visit you whenever they wanted. It's really charming, and it's a great way to have good community policing. We'll miss you. You're a tough act to follow. Good luck in your future.
Well, I'm going to complain because I could not slow you down, try as I might. I tried to pull back projects. I tried to ask you to do less, and you refused at every turn. So, and we have hallmarks of that around our community. And finally, a sound system, hurrah, hurrah. But we also have all kinds of other things. As Chuck said, you were ever present, always willing to come to every meeting I had, and I really, really appreciate that. And I think it took someone having you to show where our strengths and weaknesses really were, and that's really been very, very helpful and very informative to me as a new board member. So I thank you very, very much. And then I'm going to transition into board business. So, but one more round of applause, please. Before I don't turn my head. Okay. Well, now I will speak directly to you. So the Park Buildings Committee met on October 5th. We heard from the 5 architects that submitted proposals for our RFP. They were, let me say, universally wonderful, if you were able to be there. And the delight was that every team had a Kensington resident, someone who knows and loves this building and was so enthusiastic about bringing it into the 21st century and making it truly safe. So I thank all of those architects, and we have a plethora of riches. There will be, at this time, no October 17th meeting of the Park Buildings Committee. We're delaying just a little bit because of more pressing matters for the board right now. So that I will alert everyone when that next presentation will occur after I talk to my committee. On October 7th, I was able to attend the State of Our Schools breakfast for West Contra Costa School District. It was a wonderful event, and if you get a chance to meet the new superintendent, Matthew Duffy, he's a ball of fire. So a lot of fun and very affirming about the state of our schools. I just returned last evening from the 6th annual CSDA, California Special Districts Association Conference. I have a whole lot of information to share, but haven't been able to bring it together yet. I was able to attend presentations on board onboarding, strategies for collaboration, district reorganization, and navigating a CalPERS audit. So that information I will be sharing with you. Yes, I thought it was timely myself. That information I'll be sharing over the coming weeks.
Okay. We move on to the next agenda item. What? Oh, I'm sorry. How could I forget?
Staff comments? All right. So I will not repeat anything that's on the general manager's report, other than to highlight just one aspect, because I think it's extremely important. That is the prescription take-back day is slated in conjunction with the fire department, October 22nd from 10 to 2. So any kind of excess medication that you have, please bring it by the fire station and the police station, public safety building, and drop it off, and then go about your business. So, and then, of course, the 23rd, which did not make it in there, is the parade from 12 to 3. So everyone, the entire community is invited for that. Make sure that you go to that. Then lastly, it's, for me, the easiest way to describe this is that in 2017, which is just a few months from now, if you count my 3 years active military police time, it'll be 40 years in law enforcement. And it's time to go on and do something else. I've got 4 beautiful grandchildren and just kind of want to do something different. I am absolutely not being fired. I would tell you and be honest if I was not. In fact, if I was to be truthful, I think most of the board is a little irritated with me that I am leaving at the time that I am, if I was to be completely honest. What I have learned about this community is it's a fantastic, and there's great people in this community. There's obviously absolutely more work to be done in the police department, but I do believe in the community. But I do believe we've set the ship right, is a term that I believe that President Welsh used one time, that the ship needed to be righted. And I think that I've been able to update policies and update a lot of, personalities and kind of at the same time always have that open door policy, as been mentioned, because I think it's important. And this district and the people in this district, all right, are passionate and care about this district. I have no problem with having passion. I love that fact. There's great questions that are being asked, and those obviously questions need to be answered. So I have no problem with any of that. It's been a great time, almost the year and a half. And one thing that I think that I've told a couple people that I wasn't just here a month or 2 months. I've now vested in this community. So I'll be looking to see what the board does. And now having an outstanding system, sound system, that I really want to give kudos to Advanced Systems Group. They are absolutely top notch. They put it in the system. They were here tonight. They're going to certainly hear, they've already heard it from me about not having a plug-in for these, but, as I told the earlier story, things like that happen. There's a few other dynamics I want to tweak a little bit, but there's still things that obviously that are left undone, as mentioned, but, I will assist any kind of transition, and I will tell you the same thing I told the board. I'll stay as long as I need to stay until the board makes a decision relative to my replacement. So thank you for those in the community that have sent emails and well wishes to me. It is very, taken very appreciative, and just want to go do something else. So thank you, everyone.
We'll miss you. Okay, now we move, I'm sorry. I'm fired. Go ahead.
No, not fired. I'd like to take a moment also to thank Chief Hart. It has been a pleasure to work with him. He is a consummate professional. He has pushed staff, all of us, to produce more for your benefit. So those of you who see some overtime hours, who see longer hours for non-sport staff, it's all been work at his direction for your benefit. I'd also like to compliment him for the work he's done in the park, all the trees that were trimmed, the benches that were added, the barbecues that were added, again, all for the community's benefit. Then last but not least, this sound system. This is something I think you envisioned from the first time you attended one of our meetings. It was long in coming, but this man persevered at this project, as he did with every project, to make sure that every detail was perfect and that all the pieces were in place before he said, yes, let's go. And again, all of it done with the board's approval. He always worked very hard to make sure he kept the board apprised. And I know for a fact, because I answer the phone most of the time, that anytime someone called to speak with him and I asked, Chief, do you have time to speak with whomever? And unless he was truly otherwise occupied, he said yes. So we are indeed very fortunate to have had this man at the helm for the last year and a half. And I'm kind of hoping that you don't find a replacement right away so that he actually might come to another meeting or two. So anyway, that having been said, thank you very much.
Thank you, Lynn. Okay, now, we go on to the consent calendar. Would anybody like to comment on one of these items or take it off for discussion?
May I pull off items A, E, and G, please?
A, E, and G.
Yeah.
Anybody else on the board want to pull an item? Anybody from the public want to?
I would like to pull A and B.
Anybody else? Okay, Chuck, tell us what you have on A.
On item A, there are 2 points I wanted to point out that I'm still a little frustrated with. And on page 7 of the minutes, Ron, am I okay out there? Can you hear me okay? I just want to make sure that, okay.
Which page 7? The
Page,
number?
well, it's hand-numbered page 7 on
Handwritten
your
page
agenda.
7.
Thank you.
I do know that if we look down, we can't be as clear when we speak, so we have to look up. We're still looking for a detailed analysis of the legal fees. I did see a summary of the reports, but it's not granular enough to really tell us what we spent our monies on to a degree that I feel comfortable bringing it to the public. So we're still pushing hard to get that, and I would like to have it sooner than later so you can see how your money's being spent and how we're using it on legal fees. Clearly, there's some issues there. And then on page 14,
Handwritten page 14.
handwritten page 14, I asked a question about Nikolai, and there, as you know, are going to be our new health plan actuarial. And the question I had was, are they coming in and we get to restart the clock, or are they simply doing a stopgap within the 2-year window so that we have to, at the end of the 2 years from the last report, we still need to do another actuary? And I don't know if that question was answered yet or not.
It was answered, and the answer that I received reminded me of attorneys when they say, it depends. That was my response. So what they really
from Adam, or who?
I'm sorry?
That came from Adam, right?
No, that came from the Nikolai.
From John?
Yeah. So
John Holtzman?
No, no.
No.
Nikolai
From the auditor, okay.
From the actuarial. So what it really boils down to, they need to get further down into the actuarial and be almost done with it to kind of get an idea before they can move forward. But they know that that's a question that they need to answer. Right now, I'm going to reference that their easiest way to describe it is they're taking the snapshot from the last one and updating it. So we believe, we're confident that we'll be able to move forward on a 2-year from that, but we're not 100% sure. So it depends.
So the answer is maybe it'll be a 2-year window from when they finish this upcoming actuary.
That's correct. But the key element, if you remember the discussion and the direction to me, was to ensure that the district, all right, has a current amount, so we know moving forward in order to what our ARC is going to be, all right, and if we need to contribute more towards our OPED costs. So we're obtaining, all right, at least that information and that data in order to move forward for the next fiscal year. And that was what the direction of the board was. So we'll get that question answered, all right, but what we don't know is, and if you remember during the discussion of the Finance Committee, it was, we're getting the amount that we need to move forward, but we're still working on it.
There was one other point here, it changes the subject. On handwritten page 9, maybe Dr. Delk's bringing this up, but there was a question about how we account for the fees that are paid to the county and whether they're an expense or something else. And I don't know if Debbie was able to speak with our auditor about that yet or not. It's at the top of page 9. And I don't need an answer now, but I think Dr. Delk would like to have an answer for that. And it hasn't been addressed yet, so if we can put that on the everybody's radar. Page 9 at the top there, the reduction in account 448 franchise fee versus an increase in certain waste recycle expenses. And Debbie indicated she would speak to the auditor about what the appropriate accounting was.
Right, we are in the process of preparing documents for the auditor this week, and we'll have the auditor probably on site next week.
That's all I had for the item A. Did you want to finish up item A before you move on?
Well, I just want to comment on that one last thing. You know, it would be nice to work it out in the most appropriate way from a bookkeeping standpoint, but in a way it's that old saying, a difference to be a difference must make a difference, from Gertrude Stein. You know, it's understood that, a certain amount of the franchise fee goes to the solid waste company at Bayview, and we get to keep the other amount. The way we showed in the budget can be done differently, but it's shown there, so there's no question that we're giving up a certain amount of that franchise fee to the company, and we keep the rest. To the county, I'm sorry. The franchise fee from the company goes to the county.
Correct.
3%, I believe it is.
Correct.
We get to keep 4%. That's the bottom line. All right, so you're done with your comment then on A?
On item A, but Dr.
So let's move on to B.
Boy, wait, Dr. Delk has
No,
something on A.
I know. Oh, on A?
Finish.
I'm sorry.
This may not be relevant because I understand that there was an amended agenda, but on the minutes that were in the original one come out, the meeting date was September 9th. Was September 8th. The footer says September 9, so that needs to be corrected. All right, you got that? All right, then if I could go on to B, it is about the infamous BV franchise fee. Last month, I noted that about $35,500 retroactively vanished from the franchise fee revenue for 15-16, and I was told that it went to the county for the 3% fee. As I said, that would seem to be a line 89 expense rather than a line 448 reduction in revenue. In the current report on page 17, which would be the handwritten 17 of the packet, a slightly different number, about $35,600 was subtracted from revenue in September. That'd be on line 448, column 1, with the notation that the negative entry reflects 15-16 payment to the county. First question, was that the actual amount of the fee or the difference in the fee and the revenue received in September? If it was the difference, how much was the franchise fee? Was the September payment in addition to that subtracted from revenue last month, which was $35,500, and now we've got a $35,600? So are we talking about $71,000 that has been subtracted in a couple months? Okay.
Would you want to get an answer to that, or you're still answering the?
Well, okay, you want to answer that one?
Yes.
You didn't push the button.
Sorry. So our CPA, Debbie Russell, made an adjustment to, as sort of a place saver for what was known to be an amount due to the county that was a close approximation. She came to the district office while I was on vacation, and she went through and she calculated to the penny the amount the amount owed to the county, and so the adjustment was backed out, the actual entry put in, and so the negative entry that you see on page 17 is the actual check written to the county.
All right, and so there weren't two?
Absolutely not.
Great. All right. Now, maybe Mr. Hart can answer this one. Is there a new contract with the county? Last month you said that it was one thing on your desk. Has that been concluded? And if so, what is going to be the franchise fee to the county?
I'll answer that. We just had a meeting with them. They are proposing to update the current MOU, which is quite old, has a lot of language.
It's expired.
Yeah, that too, but they wanted to rewrite it because a lot of the terms are out of date, so it's not just a matter of, saying, let's extend it for X number of years. They wanted to rewrite the whole thing. We just saw that a couple days ago in the meeting, and most of it, like 95% of it, as far as I can tell at my first read, is nothing significant. It's just a matter of modernizing the language. The fee is not going to change. They're not making a proposal to change the fee. Okay. And so, time-wise, I would like to have an attorney look at it, and I don't think there's any real time pressure to get it done, but I'd like to get it done next couple months. Okay?
And I'm going to have to probably sit down with Lynn or somebody and explain why the county fee is booked as negative revenue and not as an expense. So I think, Lynn, I'll talk to you when I get back from my trip. Thank you.
Okay, there was another item E. Was that you, Chuck?
Yes, it was item E on handwritten page 25, and I have another comment later. There's some stats here about traffic safety issues, and I wanted to compliment Master Sergeant Hull. He made 35 traffic stops and issued 30 moving citations, which I think is phenomenal. I think the community owes him a debt of gratitude for making people respect the traffic safety laws. Officer Foley made 43 traffic stops, but he's got to catch up a little bit on the moving citations issued. He only had 6. I just think those are phenomenal traffic safety issues that we need to face up to, and I'm glad to see them doing their job there. There was one other thing on the next page, 26, which is Master Sergeant Hall wrote a very, very nice letter to Mr. Hart about his departure, and I thought it was solid and honest and authentic. And I really want to commend Master Sergeant Hull for his integrity of writing something as generously effusive as this was for you. I think you did a good job capturing your essence, and thank you.
The worst part, Director, is he asked me to proofread it. I'm like, really? I mean, it was very nice, it was very humbling, and, there were a few corrections that, not on an additional positive, but just some typos that I had him correct, but it was very humbling.
I actually had one other comment on page 32. There's some correspondence this year, and I guess I was looking at what Mabry wrote about this Brown-Taylor report, and I have told people to look at it. In fact, I went back and looked at it myself right here. And what's interesting to me is that Mabry and Jim and everybody's citing this as authority for the notion that, in fact, the general manager's job is 35% and the chief of police job is 65%. And, I went back to look at the report, and it's interesting because it talks about what had been in effect before 2007. It doesn't make any mention of what the current allocations are at all. And I went back to make sure I wasn't misreading it, but that's the facts. So it talks about a state of being that happened before 2007 when Brown-Taylor did this report, and clearly it was part of an organizational review he brought in to change the complexion of the force. But the numbers he gave for 65% and 35% were numbers up to 2007. He makes no mention of what the current numbers are. And I think in the matter of, to close this issue out, we should look at the job description and come up with some kind of an allocation. But so far, no one really has a good idea how much is what. So I just wanted to make that point clear because it didn't sit well with me that we saw these numbers asserted as authority for what the allocations are now. They aren't. They're simply a statement of what was in effect up to 2007, and there's no mention at all of what the current status is. So I hope that clears the air. Oh, it doesn't matter. It was as of that time. It wasn't a recommendation going forward at all.
All right, so we have the comment. Let's move.
Thanks.
Okay.
That's it.
All right, subject to the additional comments we've gotten, do I have a motion to adopt the consent calendar?
So moved.
I'll second it. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Motion passes. Okay, now, Peter Liddell will lead a presentation on the work of the Park Grounds Committee, which has been taking place over, it's been 2 years already, about? This is a project we started quite some time ago. The main thrust was to get a handle on the vegetation in the park and reduce the potential fire hazard that vegetation constituted, given the fact that we occasionally get wildfires in this general region, and we should be very cognizant of managing vegetation in a way that is best calculated to impede the advance of some kind of fire that might jeopardize the building or the park grounds to the extent we reasonably can. So this is a report on the progress of that committee.
Could I ask you to identify the members of the Park Grounds Committee? I've never known who they are, and
Yeah, I think Peter's going to do that.
okay.
Kevin, actually, keep this one on and those two off, please. So, if we can get rid of that one, too. I'm keeping this one on because it illuminates the doors. I think can everybody see that pretty well? Can you see that okay? Yes, yes? Okay. Yes, I'm sorry? Who?
The Park Grounds Committee.
Oh, I'm sorry, yes, Park Grounds Committee. Yes, currently the members of the Park Grounds Committee are Director Welsh and General Manager Hart, Charlie Danielson, Katie Gluck, and myself. And we have been, did I miss anybody? Oh, yeah, we were the people who've been kind of, I'm sorry, and Gretchen as well. That's the core group that has been working on this project since the beginning. And we've had a lot of people who have visited us from sometimes for just one session, sometimes for many. And we'll list as many of those as we could remember at the end of this. Not that hard, or I wouldn't be there, but. So, we'll talk, I'll give you some before and after pictures. It's a little small, but I'm not sure if the pointer will reach that far. In this picture, you can see mainly, this is the before picture is always on the left. And we have a little starting bunch of pampas grass there. We have a tree here that was growing in unstable soil. And if it went over in a windstorm, such as we're likely to have in the next day or two, there's a chance it might land on top of the community center, especially the new rooms over there. And so that was removed. It's missing in this picture. And the pampas grass is gone, and also some of the shrubbery that you see through here is also gone. I won't go into a lot of detail, but if you take a walk around the park grounds sometime in the daytime, you'll see that it looks a bit tidier than it used to be. Or you could come back on the second Wednesday of the month from 2 to 4 and actually join us in this effort. And we'll give you a tour, yes. And I've actually learned a lot about pruning and whatnot from this. So if you want to educate yourself so you can maintain your own yard and grounds, this is a great way to do it. You don't have to spend 2 years doing it. I'm just a slow learner, but a session or two, and Charlie will tell you everything you need to know. This is the bushes looking at the corner, right out that door to the left. What we're trying to show here is that in the before picture, the bushes were growing very tall and up towards the eaves. And that is bad because if there is a fire that is running along the ground and it gets into the bushes being this close to the eaves like this will carry it into the building. And the eaves are one weak point in buildings where fire does get in, can get into the roof, and pretty much your building is gone. So that's called ladder fuels because it takes the fire from the ground up either into trees or into the structure itself. So this is all you really have to do is just keep the shrubs at a height of 4 feet or less, and keep your trees trimmed up so that the lowest branches are about at least 10 feet above the ground. And that will keep ground fire from spreading into trees and buildings. The shrubs require regular pruning, but we do it about once a year, and that seems to suffice. Maybe it's because we haven't had much rain, but that seems to work for us. Next, we're looking kind of from the other side of that view, and the same thing. The before picture shows lots of growth that's really right up against the eaves, and this was just taken a few days ago. We're maintaining these shrubs away from the eaves, and this one could use a bit of a trim, but pretty much it's much safer than it was. Continuing on, now we're looking down that side of the building there, and again, these shrubs were growing up into the eaves here, and now we've got them cut down significantly, adding some space for safety there. This is the little red shed that is just on the other side of this wall here. And when we first started doing this, it was surrounded by shrubbery. There were branches from this redwood that's right beside it that were kind of coming down and hanging pretty close to the roof, and lots of shrubbery behind it. We cleaned out lots of the shrubbery around it, and we've done some work. We don't go into trees ourselves. We do all this with hand tools, and we generally stay on the ground. But if we need to do something like tree trimming or tree removal, the amount of hours that we spend doing this, Diablo Fire Safe Council will count that as an in-kind donation, and they will match that. And we've gotten grants of, I think, $5,000 or $10,000. That's allowed us to do some serious tree trimming of redwoods and removal of other trees. And Kevin has been our, what would we call it, proposal writer? He's administered the grants. Mm-hmm. Yep, it all worked very smoothly. So thank you, Kevin, for that. He is our Uber volunteer, and we'll get him out there pruning one day. This is a view of the back of the shed. It was kind of used as a little storage dump. We've cleaned that all out, and the brush behind it is gone now too. You can see in the before picture, it's kind of hard to see the community center there, and in this picture, you actually can see some signs of structure. That's right. Yes. What Charlie's referring to is there was a nice insulating layer of flammable material on the top of the shed. And again, if sparks go into that, that goes up and spreads to the tree. It's all about taking the easily removable flammable material out of the picture. And then walking a bit up towards that corner of the building and looking away from it, you would be seeing there's a little hill there and a residence on the other side. There were lots of volunteer trees, trees that hadn't, and shrubs that hadn't been planted. They had just sprouted from seed or whatever. And not all of them were doing well. A lot of them, some of them were dead. Some of them had broken branches and whatnot. So all that unhealthy wood, again, is much more flammable than a nice growing healthy tree. So we pruned a lot of that back and cleaned shrubbery out from the hillside. And again, that was, a lot of that was Kevin's arranging for our regular gardeners to do that from time to time. And that was a great help, especially for a project that comes up, and we'll talk about that. This is a view from the road that goes up to the school, kind of halfway up and looking down. These stairs are that old play structure that's up there. And what we're trying to show you with this is there's a particular tree here that when we first started had lots of low branches that were dead and dying, some of them kind of broken off. And we, what's called, limbed them. We removed them to so that there are no branches lower than 10 feet from the ground on that tree. And you can also see there's lots of undergrowth, weeds growing up here, and underbrush here. We attacked the underbrush and some juniper bush here. Juniper bush is a very, very flammable bush. It has a lot of oil, and if you've been to any of the KPSC's wildfire talks, a small juniper bush is equivalent to a gallon of gasoline when it starts to burn. So it's hot, burns fast, burns for a long time. Great thing for starting fires. And not a great thing for landscaping in this area. But there it was, so we removed probably 90% of it, and we decided we're going to take out the rest of it as well. But also this dry grass that had grown up, Kevin asked the gardeners to take care of that and trim it down, and now we're maintaining that at a manageable level. Lots more, less fuel to burn on the ground. Next is an old friend of ours here. This stuff looks like, when I grew up in New England, this grew in swamps. It's called pampas grass. I think it might be a different plant here. But it's a weed, and it grows, and year upon year as it grows, the core of it tends to die out, and the active growth is on the outside, so it spreads out and gets wider and wider. And that dead core houses a lot of flammable material, and it produces millions of seeds when it goes to seed, and it spreads itself all over. And we have little patches of it all around the parks, and we're just digging it up as we go along, because it's very flammable. And also, there were shrubs back up here that hadn't been tended, and they'd grown up to tree height, 15, 20 feet high, and they were both ugly and also serving as ladder fuel. So we have trimmed them back. It's kind of hard to see in the picture because the light wasn't good then, but we've trimmed those back to be about 4 feet high, and they're kind of naked now, but they're starting to grow out, and they will turn into bushes over time, and we will maintain them as bushes from now on. So it is possible, if something you like has gotten out of control in your yard, you can cut it back down, and it will remember that it's a bush and will start to grow out sideways. Sometimes from the roots directly, or sometimes from the remaining trunks, and you can have a manageable bush again. This was one of our tougher jobs. This is looking at the fence farther up that way, but looking kind of towards the north at the neighbor's house, the fence that separates parkland from the residence. There was lots of trees that were growing over the fence, and this great patch of blackberry and poison oak that grew all the way to the fence. And in the wintertime, the blackberry dries out and it's flammable. I'm not sure if the poison oak probably dries out a bit too, and it's pretty flammable. But the thing is that all that area is unusable. The thorns from the blackberry and the threat of poison oak meant that no one went up there, and it consumed a fair amount of area. So we had, actually Kevin had his stalwart gardeners, because we tried to do it, and it's very hard to go up and carefully pick the poison oak out and get rid of it. It's very, very slow. I don't know how they did it, but they were very brave, and they removed the blackberry and the poison oak. The next picture shows a pretty dramatic change. This is looking along the fence so all that vegetation grew right up to the fence, again, ladder fuel for carrying fire, if there was a fire in the parkland, into the residence next door, probably engendering a lawsuit, or fire could go the other way as well. But now we're maintaining that stretch all the way up to the end of the land as just maintained grassland, and it's much safer. This is looking at the driveway that goes from, say, the dumpster up to the amphitheater. It's looking from the amphitheater area back towards the dumpster. And when we started again, there's the evil juniper bush, and you can see that we've taken most of it out. There's a little bit of it left right there, and we'll be removing that in the next couple of months. Let's see. More of our friend pampas grass. It was a great dried out mound of it. And this is probably at its worst, and you can see it's just a pile of dry stuff waiting to catch fire. And it burns very nicely, and we've removed it completely. That's the site of our old dumpster that it became a community dumpster, and so we have removed that and replaced it with a much smaller one up at the corner there, which is securely locked. And which you couldn't see before. Much less scary to get out of the parking lot now. And we're getting to the end. This was a dead tree that had grown, I don't know, it had grown up. It was a volunteer tree, not planted. Was it a planted tree? But it had died. Too bad. Okay, because this goes back to 2014. It was one of the first things we did. And now we don't have that to worry about. We also wound up, you can't really see it, but we cleared some of the brush off the hillside behind the bench so that that all looks cleaner now. So thank you to everybody who helped over the last few years. We've had, we think, maybe 10 or 15 different individuals who have come from time to time and worked on this project. But we want to thank most Len Welsh and Kevin Hart for their support throughout. Volunteers Charlie Danielson and Dan O'Brien started the whole effort. Dan O'Brien lived up just on Highland, and he was a former Forest Service firefighter, and he looked around and saw that we had serious problems. He suggested we do something about it. We got a group together. Charlie joined in, and we've had great success since then. So Katie and Gretchen, also longtime members. Lisa Corona, Ray Barraza, Peter Conrad, Mabry, thank you. And many more whose names I couldn't remember. But thank you all. Is there anybody here who did work on it, who didn't, I missed? But anyway, thank you all very much. But wait, there's more. Also, we got a lot of help from Bayview Refuse. They've given us free green waste disposal from the get-go, and that's been a tremendous asset. Diablo Fire Safe Council and Sierra Wood for facilitating the grants, and especially the chief writing the proposals and getting us the moolah. And the Arlington Community Church would let us use the parking lot for the big dumpster for the time we had it. And so thank you all for your help.
Any quick questions for Peter?
Katie wants me to tell you that we've had up to 10,000. Our budget was. Oh, yeah, very important. Our budget was and still is zero. We're not supported by any money, and we've stayed on the budget. Yes, we splurged on signs for the dumpster because if you remember when the big yellow dumpster was down there and it became everybody's personal dumpster, we now have signs on the little one that says, this is for green waste only. There are machine gun traps watching it day and night. However, our sweat equity has earned us $10,000 in grant money. So far, we're turning a profit, and we're going to keep it that way. So again, thank you all who've helped, and thanks for everybody's support.
Just a quick footnote, too. I just want to give a shout-out to Charlie Danielson, because I went to a few of those sessions until my back got in the way, but it was wonderful getting lessons from her on vegetation management, and also she's a wealth of knowledge about what's local vegetation and what's invasive vegetation. It's fun to work with her. So thank you very much, Charlie. Let there be light. Thank you. Okay, the next item, 7B, is a combination of giving an update on where we're going and trying to find a replacement for Chief Hart when he leaves at the end of the month. And also, Vanessa Cordova had asked to have as part of this discussion I guess, description and consideration of the succession authorization for succession planning for interim GMCOP position piece that was developed by Vanessa and Rochelle. And since Vanessa's not here, Rochelle, I don't know if you wanted to say anything about that.
I do. I mean, Vanessa's comment is that she returned the item to the dais to provide the public an opportunity to hear and comment on the board's plan to fill the imminent vacancy of the interim GMCOP position. So when we wrote this document, we were discussing ideas and considerations for moving the district forward. At this time, you can see, of course, that this was done in May of 2015. There we are. When we were discussing I'm sorry, 16, to move moving into the next phases. So I think what initially, she was going to guide us through this discussion, but it was for us and the community to express their concerns or interests as we go forward, and to maybe do a quick pulse on what people are feeling right now after hearing the ad hoc committee.
Okay, well, maybe it would be good to talk about what we're trying to do in terms of coming up with a replacement, which is fully intended as an interim replacement. Let me just say a little bit. So Chief Hart's leaving at the end of the month. The ad hoc committee has just finished its report, which goes into the pros and cons of maintaining the current setup or going to a split position. And there are different ways to consider how we might go into a split position. Split meaning, two separate people, one occupying the GM position, one occupying the police chief position. And I do think the board is going to need to have a discussion about where it wants to go next, given the information that's been brought to light by the ad hoc committee and the study that's been done by the committee. So I think there's more time that's needed to figure out exactly where the community wants to go on a permanent basis with that issue. In the meantime, we have a candidate who was part of the initial interviews from which we hired Chief Hart, Kevin Kyle, who we have been talking to and appears very interested in entering into an interim contract with us. The plan is that we would come in as what's called a retired annuitant, which means that he's drawing essentially the kind of salary he got when he was not retired. There's no pension involved, no pension liability involved for us, no health care liability involved for us. It's just a monthly or even an hourly kind of payment for that person's time. The way retired annuitancy works for a former state employee, which he is that you can work for up to 9 months per fiscal year, 8-hour, 40-hour week equivalent time, 9 months of that per fiscal year. So he would be starting out, if we can hire him as of November 1st, he would be starting out then. He could stay for as long as 9 months within this fiscal year. If we wanted him to stay that long, we would have the ability to terminate him at any point if we decided we wanted to move to another arrangement. So there's no obligation time-wise. It's actually quite convenient for us. The only limitation really is that if he runs out of time in the fiscal year, then we don't have access to him anymore until the next fiscal year begins. So that's sort of what we're considering is entering into a short-term contract, interim contract with him as a retired annuitant. Did you want to add something? Go ahead.
I want to clarify that this would be, we would post the job because we would be looking for a quote-unquote permanent replacement, assuming we keep this structure in place, and that's one of the requirements of hiring him. So we would be doing it in that position.
Let me say it again if you want. So actually, we have to open the position up to other candidates if they're interested. So we have to actually begin recruiting again, just as we did before when we began the process that resulted in hiring Chief Hart. So we will be advertising for the position on the website and perhaps in a local newspaper. He's a candidate we know about. We might see another one, but so we'll have to see what comes along. But it is an active recruitment for somebody new to fill this position, and whether or not it's permanent or not is just not decided. Go ahead. Question. Come on up, please.
While she's coming up, can I clarify?
Sure.
My understanding, it's 960 hours per fiscal year, not, it's done by the hours, not monthly. I mean, we can.
Well, I said 40-hour week equivalent
Okay.
of 9 months. I think it
So
comes out to the
just
same
that-
thing.
That is our cap, and, go ahead. Sorry.
No, finish.
And that some of the concerns we're still discussing with the legal team because we have clarifications that we need to process before we can actually speak fully on the
Not hearing? I'm
position.
sorry. What?
Oh, he has a question.
Just real quickly, he was
Go ahead.
actually the second of 3 candidates we interviewed when we brought on Mr. Hart for the job. So we do have his resume. Well, actually, we did make it very public.
It was published last time around.
So let me
but
just
it's a good point.
summarize,
It's a
let me
good point.
summarize something about him, because
Just a minute. The question was, what is the background of this person? How do we know he's qualified? I think that's what you're asking, right? Just want to make sure everybody heard the question. Go ahead, Pat.
So let me summarize, because you may not recall, or maybe you weren't there when we were interviewing him. Kevin Kyle was the assistant chief in Santa Clara County for many, many years. He assumed the interim job of chief of police for Santa Clara County for a period of time when the chief retired unexpectedly from the position. So I think it was about 1.5 years, if I remember it.
2 years.
Oh, 3 years, thank you.
Two, I said 2 years.
2 years, somewhere in that range. He has had experience doing all the kinds of things that are important for this job, including building renovations, managing large staffs, doing discipline, doing budgets, all of the kind of experience that you would expect for someone working in that large a district to have had in order to be able to step into this position as quickly as he may have to. He's a delightful man, extremely kind, extremely professional. And while interim general manager and chief of police Hart will be a hard act to follow, I think that he will be an equally acceptable and really add a lot to our community, the professionalism of the department. He will continue the good work that Chief Hart has done thus far. So he's got all kinds of skills, and before we make any decisions, obviously, we would certainly make sure that the public sees his resume again. But it all was shared at the initial meetings that we had regarding the position.
Is he a resident of Kensington?
No, he's not.
Wish he was.
Thanks, Frank, for the floor. My question is simple. So we would have an interim arrangement with Mr. Kyle, and he would be the interim GMCOP?
Yes.
And then, and he would be on a basis that's mutually agreeable of per diem or per hour, whatever. Will we have access, could he be an applicant for the position then?
I don't know if because of his retired annuitant status, whether he could actually apply. I don't know.
No, he cannot.
All right.
Retired annuitants, after you are allowed, from my understanding, now we need to clarify because, but from my understanding, on that basis, you are allowed one shot, one contract with time limits, 960 hours that cover you can cover 2 fiscal years, but it's one contract. Once you cannot write a contract for the first fiscal year and then rewrite a contract, say, beginning again for June 1st. It's one shot.
In other words, the maximum time he could spend would be the 960 hours during this fiscal year plus the next 960 hours the fiscal year after. But again, if we said, after 2 months, we have a different arrangement, we don't need your service anymore, we'd have that option.
And one of the really important factors that I think goes to part of what you were asking is that he can't be paid at an hourly rate that is more than what the current chief is earning. And so whatever that hourly rate is it. And because he's a retired annuitant, he doesn't have benefits or retirement.
Doesn't get benefit. So I say snap him up.
Why don't we, any more information to put out? Anybody want to say before we take comments?
Oh, the only thing I of course have said for a while now that I favor bifurcation. I just believe that after seeing the level and the amount of work that goes into the job, it's really not, seeing how much work Chief Hart did, after reviewing the ad hoc committee's work as well, I do not believe that we hold the capability of encompassing one person. So I still favor bifurcating the position, but I have questions for our attorneys about how that process works and how that is accomplished legally and correctly. We're all working together to figure out, to make sure that we're following the letter of the law in terms of job posting and giving notice to the community, so.
Yeah, just on the bifurcation thing, I mean, that's obviously firmly on the table for discussion, but there are different ways to go about that. It was suggested, for example, that one option would be a part-time general manager and a full-time chief, or perhaps part-time for both, or full-time for both, which of course would have a price tag associated with it. So there's still some big issues to work out, and I personally think that should seriously be considered, but we need community input on it, and we're not going to be able to do that most likely for several months. And so we have to take action now to make sure that we have the smoothest continuing operation of the community as we consider whether we want to change the way it's done.
And contrary to public opinion, from the time I came on the board, I actually questioned why we didn't have the general manager and the chief of police divided. Of course, no one ever bothered to ask me what my opinion was on that. It wasn't really appropriate to say anything about it. I continue to believe that that is probably the structure we should have. But to rush into that decision right now, to take a chance of undoing the good work that has been done by Chief Hart in reforming a lot of the practices that had gone astray under poor management from our previous chief. I truly believe that it is in the best interest of the community for a short period of time, and that may be a month, 2 months, 3 months, I don't know. However long it takes to figure out how we're going to fund it, how we're going to structure it, what the responsibilities will be, what the division of labor will be, where the offices will be, all those kinds of questions have to be answered. So the people who say we should rush into this decision and make it in the next 2 weeks before Chief Hart leaves, I say that is irresponsible. We need to make a reasoned choice here, and we need to make sure that it's a smooth transition so that we don't lose any of the good work that has been done thus far to turn this community and this police department around.
Okay, if we're done with our comments here, step right up. You don't have to raise your hand, just come up.
I don't think I'm being irresponsible in saying that because this is an interim time, that it might be an opportunity for us to try something so that we have at least a little bit of a new perspective on things, and it would at least offer some other way to do things. My suggestion is that we try having a separate general manager who has the skills to manage from a business perspective, and somebody who works as the person who acts as the police chief. He does not necessarily have to be the police chief. We are required as a special district to have a general manager. And I do commend you. You did raise the issue early on with separating and having a hierarchical structure so that it doesn't come to the police chief, who then puts on a different hat and acts as the general manager, having to try to make some comment about a complaint about him, okay? You can't have the same person into the same role. It doesn't work, and we've seen it repeatedly. And I think to Chuck, I would say that if this seems to have been the way we've operated for 60 years, maybe it's time to look at what the community was like, the population, what police work was like 60 years ago. I suspect it was nowhere near as complicated as it is right now.
Since you raised my name, I'll be very quick here. The fact of the matter is, it's a question of cost, and if we can afford it, that's terrific. I'd love to have the job split in two. It's simply a question of cost. We don't know what it's going to cost. We don't know who's going to do those jobs. Until we do, I'm in favor of an interim arrangement so we can move into that transition intelligently. So don't, yeah, it's been done for 60 years, that's fine. My point is, I'm very flexible in moving towards the future if we can afford it.
From your mouth to God's ear.
There you go.
And let me just clarify that I do think that Kevin Kyle has the kind of background and experience that he actually can fill this role quite adeptly. He's going to be really terrific if we're able to get him.
Well, I need to get close enough to read my fine print here. I think to some extent you have the cart before the horse. You started interviewing somebody. What I want to know is why were you interviewing a candidate when you had not discussed in public what to do? The subject of what to do is now coming up. So I think that should have been done. And it's looked like you were just going to ignore this continuity plan that Sheriff Watts and Cordova had presented last May, I believe it was. And actually in that they gave several possibilities. And I don't think anybody has been saying, we have to make a final decision. I'm glad to see that you're looking at the sort of replacement you're looking at is clearly a temporary one if you're looking at the retired annuitant. You've said it's just, so that does give a lot of time, give more time in it. Although I do think it's a chance to try a temporary part-time general manager. I think some people have said, well, we can't afford a full-time general manager, but it seems like from the ad hoc report, part-time general manager will work after all. We're a small district. We're not any sort of a city. But I think this is an opportunity to have a public hearing solely on the topic of this, what we should be doing for the bifurcation of the general manager, which is not not necessarily the decision of what to do in the interim, because, you got to do something, right soon. But have a public hearing, and I suggested this several times, and you guys just don't want to buy into the program, but have a public hearing, notice that topic, no decisions made, no votes made, and for you to tell the public and the public to tell you what they want, and it'll force you guys to listen a little bit more.
Mabry, with all due respect, we just had the report from the ad hoc committee, right? So the next step, and I've been saying it, is we have to get some input from the public so that we
I
do this
suggested public
community-based
hearings
thing.
before there was even an ad hoc committee.
Well,
It got pushed
we need
aside.
information to give the public. We've got that now, so.
Well, I have to agree with you, Pat, and with the rest of what you've said, Len, with respect to how to approach this. It would be, I think, a mistake to rush into an experimental model before we have made a real decision. So I have no problem with hiring an interim who fills both positions, while I do think that that's a very poor model. Len, I mean, not you, Len, Chuck, you raised the question of whether we can afford the two positions. I raised the question of whether we can afford not to. I think that the fact that the things have been structured the way they have been have resulted in incredible costs, legal costs, all kinds of costs. I don't think we can afford to continue on the path we've been on.
Lynn, can I just say one quick thing here, and it's important. We have a chance to draw a brand-new slate on how this whole community is governed. When we put this ad hoc committee together, the notion was, as Vanessa said, there are no sacred cows. Everything regarding community governance should be on the table for everybody to look at. And that's where we are now. I think Mabry's point about public hearings, I've been trying to, as I agree with Lynn here, the next step is to tell the public in a series of meetings, these are what the ad hoc committee report says. Now, what kind of a community do you want to live in? What kind of governance structure do you want? And it covers the whole waterfront. It's not just one or two things. If you're going to put the police up for review, you put everything up for review. No, there are no sacred cows. So let's be clear about that. We have a clean slate to do whatever we think the community wants and what the community wants to do. So I'm all in favor of that. I've been arguing for 2 or 3 years about town hall meetings on where this community wants to go with this direction, and you were very complimentary of me for doing that, and you offered to help. So we have this.
I'm still offering help.
And don't worry, you'll be.
I'm saying I agree with the approach of taking enough time to engage in an orderly process.
Yeah.
And restructure what's going to be restructured.
Absolutely.
I'm just agreeing with that.
Good.
But I'm also saying that I don't believe that the continuation of the combining of the two positions is an economy measure. I think it's just the opposite. And, I had another issue that's dropping out of my head, so I'll just wait.
Okay. Marilyn Stolen. We're faced with deciding whether we want another police chief who does GM work, or do we act on the findings of the ad hoc, which stated that separating the GM COP is the preferred structure,
and seek an interim, possibly through PLG, and utilize Sergeant Hull as an interim chief of police. With that being said, let me read parts of the ICMA brochure, which is the City Managers Professional Association. They set ethical standards and certification for its members. Here are a few of their reasons why a city manager, who is a, quote, nonpartisan manager, unquote, can make an enormous difference in a community, end quote. And I'm quoting from their brochure. Professional managers bring together leadership, vision, and focus on results needed to create better communities by managing financial and human resources, delivering services, planning strategically for community development, using performance metric systems to drive continuous improvement, and committing to high ethical standards. ICMA reports, quote, many local governments have found that their overall costs are actually reduced under competent management. Savings can come from decreased operating costs, increased efficiency and productivity, improved revenue collection, and effective use of technology. The economic health of the community may also benefit from implementation of improved business development and retention strategies. And I'm quoting again. The manager brings to local government the benefits of his or her training and experience in administering municipal or county projects and programs. The manager prepares a budget, recruits, hires, terminates, and supervises staff, serves as the council's chief advisor, and carries out the council's policies. Council and residents count on the manager to provide complete and objective information about local operations, discuss pros and cons of alternatives, such as splitting the GMCOP and the costs of contracting, and offer an assessment of the long-term consequences of their actions. In response to the question in the brochure, what value does a professional manager contribute to a community? It states they provide value because they, quote, work in partnership with elected officials to develop sound approaches to community challenges by bringing together resources to make the right things happen and produce results that matter. They promote ethical government through a commitment to a set of ethical standards that goes beyond those required by law. They develop and sustain organizational excellence and promote innovation, focus relentlessly on efficient and equitable service delivery, policy implementation, and evaluation. They bring a community-wide perspective to policy decisions and strive to connect the past and the future while focusing on the present. They help the governing body, that's our board, develop the long-term vision that provides a framework for policy development and goal setting. And lastly, they encourage inclusion and build consensus among diverse interests. I strongly encourage the board to take steps to employ, for the very first time in Kensington's history, a professional general manager to guide the town in its next steps. I don't think the board will be sorry or the town will be sorry to have someone who is specialized in handling a lot of the questions that we have.
I remembered. Did I understand that the position of interim has to be advertised, that it has to be open?
Yes.
So what steps are being taken there? It sounds as though you guys have already sort of made up your mind.
Well, we're going to put the advertisement up, yeah. We made up our mind to do that.
And that means that you have to interview people who apply?
Yeah, if somebody comes along, we don't have to. We have to assess their qualifications and decide whether we should.
Well,
just as we did with the other candidates in the past.
Okay.
Ron Wiseman, if you have to start interviewing now, and you find someone you like, then you're going to shove them back into a GOP, GMCOP position again.
He can't hear you. Can you get a little closer to the mic? Sorry.
Yes. If you hire a new person right now, let's say you hire this gentleman that you liked, but a new one comes along and you hire him, what is he going to be? Is he going to be GMCOP or not?
It's going to be interim. It's going to be a person filling an interim position doing both duties until we figure out how we want to restructure it.
I thought you said that the gentleman you're getting is already interim. So this is just an interim?
No, the position we're hiring, whoever takes the job into, is an interim temporary position. Doesn't matter who it is. The position itself is temporary interim.
Okay.
We keep the person as long as we think we need him or her.
Isn't this an ideal opportunity, since this man can work 3/4 time or 32 hours a week, which would let him work for a full year? And the same money with the other quarter of a salary, you could give it to Officer Hull, Master Sergeant Hull, or someone else, and try out the system, see how it works a little bit?
Well, just to repeat something I said before, I personally don't want to experiment with the town of Kensington. I would like to, if we're going to make a change, I would like to have a community process where the community gets to review the incredible work that ad hoc committee did to get information people can use to make an informed decision. This is a big move, and we don't want to just say, hey, let's try something else and see how it works.
Okay. It just seems that you have an opportunity now to not experiment. You're experimenting anyhow, because we have this nice gentleman here that's been here for a year and a half, whatever it was, and now he's leaving, and we never got the interim COP GM thing straightened out. And it'd be nice if we could. What is wrong? I mean, does it cost us anything to have Master Sergeant Hull work on that? And let this other man work full-time, 32 hours a week, and let him work for the full year, or till you find another replacement.
Well, I really don't want to get an argument with you. Just so you understand, and I think it's sort of the sense of the board, is that we've begun a process. We got a great start with the ad hoc committee. We don't want to be moving the needle anywhere until we get better participation of the community in making this decision. So we're just sort of holding things as they are, making sure no balls get dropped while we decide exactly how we want to work this in the future. And it's an opportunity going forward. It's not like we're losing the opportunity next month or the month after. As long as we move forward with, a process of dialogue with the community, we have the opportunity.
It feels, I mean, I hear you, and I understand what you're saying, but it feels like, it feels like you're pushing the old agenda through again, and that's how it feels to me.
Sorry, that's the way it feels, but that's what we're doing.
Thank you.
John Gaccioni, 2 observations. Happy to hear from Chuck that there's going to be no sacred cows. Wonderful. I'll hold you to that. Second thing, experimenting in Kensington. Now, in reality, so far you've been experimenting because you can't separate the chief of police from the general manager. So every time someone comes in, it is an experiment. You don't have a percentage laid out for either of the jobs, so each person that takes it is an experiment. He does it his or her way. So to say you're not experimenting, I don't believe is true. The other point is, I would say your judgment as this board has been, your track record for picking people has been, I'll say, spotty. Harmon comes to my mind because now we hear all the criticism of how ineffective, how he wasn't doing his job, on and on and on. We've paid that guy good money. We're still paying him good money. But now we're hearing we didn't get what we paid for. Every time I hear that, I have to stop and say, wait a second, where are we going? I just want to bring that up as an observation. Thank you.
Dave Spath, having spent a year going through the research on this particular issue, I commend the board for taking a thoughtful approach and bringing on another interim chief. And I agree with Leonard, and I agree with Maybury, one of my colleagues on the board, that you need to listen to the public. You have to go out and and present the different options to the public, hold public hearings on this, and then make a final decision going forward. And I think you need to look also at different opportunities. I know you're hiring a retired annuitant right now. It's quite possible that you could write a contract for a retiree and not have it as a retired annuitant. We had some conversations with CalPERS about this as part of our research, and it's quite possible that you could do that both for a chief of police and for a general manager. So there are all sorts of options available. They need to be thought through very carefully, and I would commend you to doing that, which I think you feel that you should be doing. And in the interim, I think you're doing the right thing for getting a short-term interim chief of police, general manager, until the final decision can be made. So thank you very much.
I think so. Did you have anything you wanted to say?
Sure. I appreciate everyone's input. I don't think we're going to take any action. It was to listen this evening. I really do look forward to public input on this issue, but I also have to say that I'm pretty committed to bifurcating this position after being here for 2 years and attending about every meeting I can get my hands on. I have to tell you that I think as a board member, I also bring a wealth of information to the item and to the decision. So I want to use my best judgment going forward, but that will be a conversation that occurs in all realms, in the community, the board, and with our legal team. So thank you.
I want to say one other thing to just supplement what Rochelle said, and that is contrary, again, to public opinion. Rochelle and I worked to get the interviewees here together. The board majority and the board minority worked together, and she and I have worked together on trying to make sure that we do everything we can to make a smooth transition. So it is possible, and it has happened on several occasions during this board's tenure, that the board, quote-unquote, majority and minority have worked together. So I want to thank Rochelle for being part of that process and for being on top of many of the issues that we've had to deal with respect to this quick transition period. Sorry, Marilyn, for interrupting you.
I know that you've moved forward with interviewing for the combined position. Let me ask the board, have you consulted with the PLG consulting arm to get some input from them on their experience in providing a part-time GM to other communities? We are not isolated and living on a mountaintop. I've read several reports by interim general managers who have looked at our exact problems, whether to contract out or not, helping them decide on the process. It's over and over again. So I'm asking the board, have you even made an attempt to consult with them, to get some information and to find out what kind of people are in this position, what kind of people do they have, what would they do, what could see, and that to me would be real problem solving rather than just jumping in and hiring more of the same.
Can I speak really quickly? I want to make it very clear what we're trying to do here, which is to bring on an interim position so the very dialogue that Marilyn has just suggested can occur down the road. We need somebody October 31st. We can't wait. So everything that this board is doing, and I think we have consensus here, is to bring on an interim person so that we can have a thoughtful discussion about what the future looks like. And that's what this is about. It's not about hiring a permanent GM, chief of police. It's about hiring an interim person so we can have that thoughtful discussion. The second point is this actually is an action item, and I think the action item is to proceed with the framework for hiring an interim person. That's what the action item calls for, I think.
Okay, Marilyn, I do want to answer your question. I did speak to PLG. When I first opposed the extension of Chief Hart's contract on the basis of the amount of the workload, I had that conversation with John Holtzman because I wouldn't have ever opposed the extension if I didn't have a plan. And the plan, we discussed the supplemental GM that would come in and provide work, and we had discussed it, so yes. Yes. At that time, at this time, we're discussing different issues because understanding how we do this legally and correctly is a little bit different. And so that is an ongoing conversation. So I'm not opposing you, Chuck. It is an action item, but I still have some legal questions that I haven't quite clarified that I would like to know the answer to before.
And that's fine. My point here is the decision is we're moving down this road to bring on an interim general manager, chief of police. The point is to get a board approval to go through that process. And if you find out you have legal questions that aren't being answered properly, we'll have to pivot. But for now, we need to get direction from this board that it's okay to even go down that road. And that's what the action item is. It's not to hire anybody.
You can make a motion in a minute. Can we hear from this gentleman, please?
My name is Dr. Frank Lossie, and I've been a resident of Kensington for about 50 years, 50. I am very pleased to hear this discussion and to hear a number of the board speaking to the fact that they are favorably inclined towards the idea of bifurcation, which seems to me a wiser arrangement than the one that we've had for many decades already here in Kensington. I think that, I'm sorry, I don't know the name of the lady that preceded me up here.
Marilyn Stolen.
Marilyn Stolen. I was much favorably impressed by her suggestions. And one of the things that I would like to be clearer about, I heard somebody use the name John Holtzman. Is that the person that you're thinking about as a possible interim combination person?
No, he's one of the attorneys at the PLG firm, Public Law Group law firm.
Okay. So one of my questions for the people here is, how flexible is the person that you're considering taking on as an interim combination person? Would he be open to taking one or the other position if that were the wish of the board? Or is he only interested in a combined position? And I think that's an important question in terms of the degree of flexibility that's available to the board and the rest of the public in thinking about the question of bifurcation. I also have an uneasy feeling about the board's first making a decision that there will not be bifurcation in this interim post, and then going from that and presenting that as essentially a fait accompli in terms of the next step of what kind of person we're looking to hire on as an interim person. I would like to keep that option if it becomes preferable to the combined interests of the board and the public residents of Kensington to make that bifurcation in the interim process as well as possibly in the long-term process. So I think that's all.
Oh, well, I could maybe talk about, I don't want to speak to Mr. Kyle specifically, but one question that I had been in discussion with the attorney and hoping to explore, if it was not possible to bifurcate at this time, if in our rush that turned out to not be a practical consideration, I did want to explore with our attorneys whether it was possible to have a contractual obligation that had a set of dials on it, essentially, whether we could dial someone into more general manager time and less chief of police time, if you can imagine, that we're adjusting percentages.
I think that what
And
I've
so-
heard here is that there is no fixed time, and that we have to dial it in. It's got to be temporary in this first step.
Well, I wondered if we could all even turn the dial to 0 on one side, right? Turn off one burner, essentially. And that is a question that I haven't gotten a confirmation on yet, so I don't want to suggest that it's a possibility completely.
There's one thing to keep in mind here. This person's not going to be PERSable. He's not dependent on the allocation of hours towards the general manager or the chief of police for his pension, because he's being hired as a per diem person. So there's no question about contributions to PERS that might rise up as have been raised earlier.
Yeah, no long-term pension or health care liability. That's
Strictly
already.
an hourly employee.
I understand that, but that doesn't say how much of his time as an intern person will be spent on one or the other job.
There's a job description that actually sets forth what the GM chief of police does. And it's in the policy manual, and it was actually adopted about the same time as the 2007 Brown-Taylor report. It was one of the upshots of that report. So that tells us what the job should be. Now, because this person is not going to be worried about PERS pensions, we can mix and match as we want based on what the job description says. But that's the Bible for what this person is going to be doing. And I just want to bring you all back to the notion this is not a permanent hire. It's an interim hire while we decide the community wishes going forward. So we want a caretaker in place who can manage the force and manage the community governance.
Okay, we need to finish up. We've spent enough time on this. Did you want to make a motion?
Well,
I'm sorry, we have to move on. You've commented already.
Thank you.
All right, come on up real quick.
I beg your pardon?
Are you?
Thank you.
Are you okay? You finished?
Yes, I'm
Okay, thank you. Very quickly.
Very quickly, I see that this is an action item, an actionable item, but this is the first time it's been discussed here. Is it not the policy to have a discussion and then to vote on something the next time?
No.
That's only for amendments to the policy manual, which requires 2 readings. We aren't talking about amending the policy manual. We're talking about a personnel action to hire somebody on an interim basis. So,
Okay, did you want to make a motion?
I move that we allow the board that the board should proceed with, I'm not quite sure how to say this, pursuing the appointment of an interim general manager, chief of police, as expeditiously as possible.
I'll second that motion. All in favor?
aye.
Aye. Any opposed? Okay, the motion passes.
It's 9:45.
I know. So we've come to that, almost to the witching hour, where we have to decide whether we're going to go beyond 10 p.m. if we're not finished with board business. Somebody want to entertain a motion? She said that she's going to vote against going beyond 10, so why take a vote?
So I gave them the option of if they are wanting to.
I think we should take the vote. I'll move that we go beyond 10. Is there a second?
I second it.
All in favor?
Aye.
Any opposed?
I'm opposed.
All right, 3-1, we can't do it.
So
All right, 8A.
we have to prioritize what's left on the agenda so we can discuss it. And I would move that we deal with a policy manual amendment that changes the number of votes to amend the policy manual from 4 to 3.
Well, that's 8A.
That's what I thought you were.
That's
yeah,
8A.
I was giving you the option.
Thank you.
So this is arising out of recognition from previous discussions on other issues that we run into situations from time to time where one board in one era tries to pass a rule that's going to bind future boards. And that's not lawful. And in this case, the law says that basically the structure we're under requires only a majority vote to change something like a policy manual. That's what the law says. The memo that we made public last meeting basically goes into that. This is a policy manual provision that dates way before this board, and so this board is not bound by that if it doesn't want to be. So the question is whether we should take a vote to change the current rule, which is that, as stated in the policy manual, which is that it takes a 4/5 vote of the board to change any provision in the policy manual. The change would be to make it a majority vote, not anything more. Just would like to note that if you look at some of the past episodes in our politics of where things get shut down, it's by having requirements for disproportionate majorities to approve something. Things don't get done, and the motivation for doing this is so that we can proceed with, at least in my mind, is so that we can proceed with board business as we see to be necessary. If another board wants to come along and say, hey, let's do it differently, let them do it. But we should not be bound up by that provision if this board doesn't want to be.
Well, by law, you can't be. That's what the whole legal opinion is about. You can't bind a future board. The board has the flexibility to adopt whatever policies it wants. I'm sorry, Dr. Lossie. I was looking down at my notes trying to read. Can you hear me now?
Say it again, please.
Well, then I can't speak into the microphone. I'm doing my best, Frank. I honestly am.
Come on, Chuck, pretend you're in court.
Well, I'm trying to talk about the notion of amending policy 1010.20 for a first reading. What it provides now is you have to amend the policy manual with a 4/5 vote. Our legal opinion says that is not binding, and we have the power by a simple majority vote to decide to amend the policy manual. I would like to discuss that particular section alone tonight, because I think we should retain the flexibility by a simple majority to vote to amend the policy manual. Frank, could you hear that? Could you hear that? Thanks.
Any board member want to comment further?
Oh, I thought we were here public comment first.
Well, actually, the board gets to go first.
Oh, I get to
That's
go first.
okay.
Okay.
But this is a first reading because it does require 2 readings still.
Yes. I am mindful of the times that board business has become bogged down due to the requirement of a 4/5 vote. But I also believe that when we have a simple majority, we have only 60%. We're not exceeding, let's say, Congress's filibuster or percentage. So while I realize it is a slightly onerous policy, it requires a movement towards our best selves, and it requires that we work to build consensus, which has been a major obstacle of this board in the past. So I oppose this, but am well aware that, of course, that I can be outvoted and understand, of course, the decision given to us by PLG.
I want to speak to that issue because it's something that's been bothering me, and since I'm on my way out, I can say pretty much whatever I want to. So one of the things I want to talk about is from the time the board changed 2 years ago, there's been this constant discussion about the board majority versus the other 2 members. And what no one's talked about is that the other 2 members of that board come in here to every meeting with a pre-planned approach to what they're going to do. There's no consensus building. There's no effort at collaboration for the most part. There is simply an insistence that we're going to end up with a 3-2 vote. That is just detrimental to this community. I don't feel like I have to vote with Chuck and Lynn on anything. I don't feel I have to do that. And I'd like to have credit for being an independent woman with a mind who makes her own decisions about how she's going to vote. That's who I am. That's who I've always been. And so this is insulting to me as a member of this board to have people constantly telling me that I am taking direction from two other people on this board when it simply is not true. Marilyn, and I'm sorry I don't remember your first name, the fact that you sit there and laugh at something like this is just indicative of the bad behavior that you exhibit in these meetings. So I apologize.
I think it was the former director
apologize
flipping
for-
someone off that caused her to,
Well, I didn't see the flipping someone off, but I believe you were laughing before that, so. In any case, you know, David, I'm entitled to my time just as you're entitled to yours. So if you want to run for the board, feel free to. I know, too bad the meeting wasn't extended beyond 10. So my point is that we should get rid of, and Rochelle, I couldn't agree with you more, and I wish that you would walk the walk as well as talk the talk. And we would, in fact, have an effort to build consensus in this community by a board that actually operates under the idea that we should be finding middle ground and consensus and collaboration rather than constantly referring to the board majority versus the other two members. And I invite all of you to look at the way these votes have gone, to look at the way people have expressed their opinions. I can predict on every issue that Vanessa and Rochelle will vote one way, together, always. And that's as despicable as what you accuse the rest of us of doing. Maybe it's not true, maybe I'm falsely accusing them, because I'm saying that you're falsely accusing me.
Any other board comments before we go to the public? All right, go ahead.
This is going to be pretty short, all right, but I'd just like to read what I had prepared. Policy manual states that the board does not conduct meetings under formalized rules - Robert's Rules of Order, and that policy prevails when in conflict with Roberts. A lawyer friend of mine said that this means the board follows Roberts unless it decides not to, so any argument you make regarding parliamentary procedure is useless. But it seems to me that there is one Roberts rule that really should be followed, namely the 2/3 affirmative vote by the legislative body to adopt or to amend bylaws. Roberts Rules for Dummies explains that bylaws, rules, policies represent a contract that should not be too easily made or broken. And it is not clear to me how you can amend the policy by a simple majority vote without first amending this policy, which itself requires a 4-5 vote to be changed. The PLG opinion is that the policy is not legal, but state law does not prohibit a CSD board from requiring a 2/3 vote. It just sets the minimum at a majority, and 2/3 or 4/5 is in fact a majority. It is more than half. And the policy does not appear to me to bind a future board, as the opinion claims, because the policy states that it can be amended by the long-standing, widely accepted 2/3 vote, 2/3 rule, the so-called supermajority needed because changing an established rule is serious business and should not be done if more than 1/3 object. And I believe you signed on to this job. When you signed on, you agreed to follow existing policies until they were amended by a 4-5 vote. And there is one other problem with the PLG opinion. It states repeatedly that a simple majority vote is all that is required. Presumably, that means more than half of those voting. But with a legal quorum of 3 directors, that would be 2 affirmative votes and a violation of CSD law requiring a majority vote of the total membership of the Board of Directors. So there is some clarification needed. Thank you.
Dr. Delk, very quickly here, 1010.20 provides for amendment by a majority of the entire Board of Directors. It doesn't say you go to a quorum and a majority of that. So I'm looking at this.
No, it's time for the next commenter,
I'm
please. We're running
just
out of time.
saying that that is what the opinion said. The opinion only said, repeated it several times, a simple majority vote. So you need to make sure that that's clear when you write up what you're going to do.
If we get that chance, we will.
Would like to urge you to make this amendment. In the past, I have given you a letter regarding case law opinion, which appears to hold that it would be illegal, exactly as your attorneys found, to require this kind of a supermajority. And so I urge you to go forward. And just a footnote, in respect of Director Sherris-Watts' statement about building consensus, I find it extraordinary that you have made an absolute pledge, to use your words, to never, never vote to go beyond 10 o'clock, regardless of the subject matter that's on the table, regardless of the number of items that are yet to be done, regardless of precarious situations such as the one we're in right now, with needing an interim GMCOP. And I think it's talking out of both sides of one's mouth to claim to be a consensus builder and to enter into those kinds of sub rosa agreements.
Well, I'm always willing to come to a meeting. I could come back tomorrow evening and continue, and we can do that. I'm just not willing to drag the community on and on past everyone's bedtime.
It just happens that I have in my briefcase the book that Delk mentioned, and I was going to use it for myself, but I think I'm going to give it to you, and I commend it to all of you. It is Robert's Rules for Dummies.
I find it interesting that the board has gone along happily with the policy and procedures for all these years. But then when the votes started going, we'll just say maybe not as they'd rather.
Mabry, I would like to point one thing out. The manual says 20 minutes for each. Let me finish. Oh, too loud, I'm sorry. I'm trying to speak louder. The manual requires a limitation of 20 minutes for any item, any subject matter item. We have never observed that, and I haven't heard one person complain about it. So please don't make blanket statements about us. You know, we don't follow the manual and nobody approves of that, because that's one way we have never followed the manual, because we want to let people like you speak.
It wasn't a blanket. I'm just saying you were quite happy with the policy and procedures, but when the votes started to go against your way about extending the meetings, you went out and paid for a legal opinion that gave you a different opinion.
What's wrong with that? What's wrong with that, maybe? If the notion here is to get the business of the community
We wanted to
done.
know what the law was. That's what we paid for, was to know what the law is.
But you weren't.
Yep, time to go.
Okay.
But
Bye.
just very
I just
clearly
find it
here.
interesting that.
I move we adjourn.
I second the motion. All in favor?
Wait a minute. Wait a minute. What
Any opposed? It's at past 10, Chuck.
I simply want to say,
All in favor? We have a motion seconded.
What's the
All in
motion?
favor? The motion is to close the meeting because it's after 10.
I simply wanted to say this is concluding the first reading of this policy section, so next time at the second reading, we can.
All in favor? Aye.
Say what?
Pat, what's your vote?
I vote no.
The action item is to have the first reading. It's not to decide, it's just have to. Thank you.